Okay, we're back to read the next chapter of Book 6, Changes for Kaya, A Story of Courage, and we are reading Chapter 2. This chapter is called The Rogue Stallions Herd. The days were growing shorter now. Kaya heard owls screeching at night and saw geese flying high, signs that the coming winter would be a hard one. But berries were especially thick and plump this year, and with Bringsword's leadership, the women and girls were able to pick and store a great many. As the berry season came to an end, the band split up. Many journeyed down to Salmon River country to set up their winter village in the sheltered valley there. Kaya traveled with her family and the hunting party higher into the mountains for the elk hunts. The men rode ahead, leading the way. The women and children followed with travois and pack horses. Raven, Foxtail, and other young boys brought up the rear, driving extra horses to carry back the meat. As they ascended the trail, Kaya looked out across steep, rocky hillsides, split by stony gulches. Whirring ladybugs swarmed around the horses. The mountainsides glowed with deep green heather and red-orange huckleberry bushes. All around, a blue haze of smoke rose from the valleys and tinted the sky gray with ash. Though cold winter was not far off, the days were dry with no sign of rain. It was still the season of fires. The scouts constantly scanned the mountains and skies for signs of danger. As the women set up the hunting camp, Kaya helped raise the teepees, then took the twins to where Katsa and Brown Deer were preparing a meal. The boys were hungry, so Brown Deer gave them some pine nuts to nibble on while the deer meat cooked. Speaking Rain was glad to go down to Salmon River country. Brown Deer said to Kaya. "Ah, hey," Kaya agreed. "The fires in these mountains trouble her." "I'm not afraid of fire," Sparrow boasted. "It can't hurt me." "Speaking Rain knows better. Fire can hurt you," Brown Deer corrected him. She placed heated stones into the water, into the cooking basket, stirring them so that they wouldn't scorch the basket. "You must always respect the power of fire, grandson," Katsa added sternly as she put deer meat into the boiling water. "Fire is a great gift, but it has its dangers too. You remember the story of the boy who brought fire down from the heavens, don't you?" "Tell it again," the twins begged. Kaya smiled at her little brothers and at her grandmother. She thought Katsa liked to tell stories almost as much as children like to hear them. And although winter was the proper season for storytelling, Katsa couldn't resist telling one now. "Long ago, Nimipu had no fire," Katsa began, sitting down on a tule mat and giving her full attention to the story. "They could see fire in the sky, but it belonged to Hunyawat, who kept it in great black bags. When the cloud bags bumped together, they crashed and thundered, and fire flashed through the hole that was made." "That fire was lightning," Wingfeather knew this story well. "Ahe, it was lightning," Katsa went on. "How the people longed to get that fire. Without it, they couldn't cook their food or keep themselves warm. The medicine men beat their drums trying to get the fire down from the sky, but no fire came. When a young boy said he knew how to get the fire, everyone laughed at him, and the medicine men said, 'How can a mere boy do what we aren't able to do?' But the boy waited patiently. When he saw black clouds on the horizon, he bathed himself and scrubbed himself clean with fir branches to prepare for his task. Then he wrapped an arrowhead inside a piece of cedar bark and put it with his bow and arrow. He placed the white shell that he wore around his neck on the ground and asked his Waiakin to help him shoot his arrow into the black clouds that held fire. The medicine men thought they should kill the boy so he wouldn't anger Hanyawat, but the people said, "Let him try to capture the fire. If he fails, we can kill him then." The boy wasn't afraid. He waited until a thunder cloud loomed overhead, rumbling and crashing as it came. Then he raised his bow and shot his arrow straight upward. Suddenly, everyone heard a tremendous crash and saw a flash of fire in the sky. The burning arrow, like a falling star, came hurling down among them. It struck the boy's white shell, resting on the ground, and it set it aflame. Shouting with joy, the people rushed forward to get the fire. They lighted sticks and dry bark and hurried to the teepee to start fires of their own. Children and old people, too, laughed and sang. When the excitement had died down, people asked about the boy, but he was nowhere to be seen. There lay his shell, burned so that it showed like the colors of fire. Near it lay his bow. Men tried to shoot with that bow, but not even the strongest man could bend it. The boy was never seen again, but, and here Katsa touched the beautiful shell that fastened her braids, his abalone shell is still touched with the colors of flame, and the fire he brought down from the clouds burns in the center of every teepee, she said, finishing the story. Then she fixed her steady gaze on the twins, and the sharp lines between her eyes deepened. "Listen to me. You two must try to be as strong and generous as that boy of long ago." Kaya was glad to hear the old story another time, but she thought again of Speaking Rain's worry about fires. She vowed to keep a sharp watch for them as she searched the surrounding countryside for signs of her horse. On the day before the hunt, Tota hobbled the lead mare with a rope attached to her forelegs so that she couldn't wander away. He wanted the horses close by so that they could be easily round up before first light. He invited the hunters into his teepee to talk over plans for the hunt. Then the men gathered in the sweat lodge to make themselves clean. They thanked Hanyawat for all his gifts and prayed that they would be worthy of the animals they needed for food. Kaya could hear their prayer songs rising up to the Creator. That night, everyone slept only a short while. Kaya heard Tota and Kutchik rising in the dark to join the other men. They took their bows and arrows and put on headdresses of animal hides to disguise their human scent. Kaya, Itza, and Brown Deer quickly dressed themselves. They rode away from the camp long before sunrise, while the elk were still out feeding or returning to their breeding place from the salt lick. Everyone dismounted near the valley where scouts had discovered the elk herd. Raven and the boys looked after the horse while the others went forward on foot. Quickly and quietly, the hunters took up positions at the narrow end of the valley, downwind from the elk. At the wide end of the valley, the women and girls fanned out in a broad V to drive the elk ahead of them toward the waiting hunters. They took care not to startle the elk as they moved slowly forward. If the elk started running, they'd plunge right past the hidden men, who wouldn't be able to get a clear shot. Kaya concentrated on the rustle of the elk moving through the plumbed bear grass. She could make out the tips of their antlers, the flash of tan rumps, and the flicker of ear tips. Even in the faint light, she could see their tracks on the worn game trails. Birds flew up all around her, and from time to time, a woman added her whistle to the bird calls, making her position known to the others. when Kaya remembered that she should be on the lookout for fires too. Then scanned the mountain slopes at the far end of the valley. There was no sign of smoke on the plateau there, but shapes moved among the pines, and she thought she heard a distant whinny. Holding her breath, she stood still and peered through the dim light. Gradually, she made out horses emerging from the trees to graze. Kaya's heart sped. Could that be the small herd that the buffalo hunters had seen? Could Steps High be with them? Kaya stared hard, but the horses were too far off for her to see them closely. Kaya walked slowly forward again, but her racing thoughts tumbled ahead, one over the other. What if she slipped away from the others to get a better look at the horses? Couldn't she run up to the ridge for a better view and be back before the slow-moving elk herd reached the hunters? Or couldn't she get a mount and ride close enough to the horses to whistle for Steps High if she was with them? Maybe she could round up the horses by herself. Think how proud of her everyone would be. Then, right in front of her, a pair of magpies flew out of their dome-shaped nest in a thorny bush. Crying boldly, they scooped upward among the other birds. Like an upraised hand, the sight of the magpies halted Kaya's racing thoughts. No, she must not act in such a way that she could be called magpie ever again. It would be irresponsible to go after the horses by herself. She must follow in Swan Circling's footsteps and do only what was best for her people. She must work with the others so that there would be food for all. Whistling to signal her place in the group, she drove the elk forward to the waiting hunters. The hunters' arrows were swift and their aim was true. Many elk gave themselves to Nimipoo that morning. Then the women and girls prepared the meat to be packed back to the camp, where they would cook some of it and dry the rest. Kaya could tell by Brown Deer's shining eyes that Cut Cheek had hunted well. He'd given the elk he'd killed to her parents as a sign of respect. Kaya couldn't wait any longer to talk to her father about the horse herd she'd seen at sunup. She found Tota lifting a heavy bundle of meat onto a travois. Quickly, she described the horses she'd seen. Jumpsback thinks there are horses, Tota. Steps High might be with them, she added, trying to hold down her excitement. Tota put his firm hand on her shoulder. Daughter, there's not much chance that your horse could be with that herd. But there is some chance, isn't there? Kaya insisted. Steps High could have strayed off and come back this way. Tota thought for a long moment. That's possible. We'll go looking for the herd, he said. I'll ask Raven to come along. He's not needed here right now. Let's see what we can find. Kaya mounted a chestnut horse and rode out to the valley behind Raven and Tota. They followed a game trail that led upward toward the plateau where she'd seen the horses grazing. The sun was high overhead. The heat waves shimmered over the stony hillside. She was sure she'd seen the horses near those pines ahead, but now there was no sign of them. Had the lead mare taken the herd where it was cooler? The trail left by the horses curved around the mountain and angled down the northern side. Kaya's gaze swept across the slopes dotted with stunted firs and hunchbacked pines, bent down by past winter snows. Deep gulches jagged down the mountain in every direction. The herd could be in any one of them. Would they be able to find the horses before they had to rejoin the hunting party, now a long way away? The trail descended more and more steeply, and after a time they found themselves in a narrow canyon where a thick grove of tall firs grew. Spears of sunlight shafted down through the canopy of branches, and the shadowed air was a little cooler here. A small stream snaked through the trees. Tota signaled Kaya and Raven to halt their horses and let them drink. Kaya slipped off the chestnut horse that she rode and knelt upstream from the horses, drinking from her cupped hands. The spring water was clean and cold, and she was very grateful for it. When she glanced up again, she realized that the patches of dapple light in the grove of trees were moving. Slowly and silently, as if in a dream, a few horses appeared in the grove. And then a few more. Coming to the watering place, they stepped around fallen logs. When the lead mare spotted intruders, she halted in her tracks, and the other horses came to a stop behind her. Kaya got slowly to her feet. Tota and Raven stood too. Then Tota pointed to a horse barely visible behind the others, a horse whose black forehead was marked with a white star. It's like we have over here with Kaya's horse. Huh. Steps high, Kaya whispered, almost afraid to breathe. In the same moment that she recognized her beloved horse, a long-legged, spotted foal crowded against Steps High's side. Her horse had a little one. Tota climbed back onto his stallion runner again. Raven jumped back onto his horse too. Whistle for your horse, daughter, Tota said softly. She'll recognize your whistle. Call her to you. Kaya's heart thudded, and her lips were dry. She licked them and managed to make the shrill whistle with which she'd called Steps High so many times. Her horse's ears shot up. Kaya whistled again, and Steps High began to move toward her, the foal following closely. Come on, girl, Kaya urged her horse. She whistled a third time, just as the air was split by a stallion's scream of fury. The rogue stallion had come down from the hill to claim his herd and protect it. The rogue was a reddish bay with a black mane and tail. Swift as an antelope, he plunged through the trees and across the clearing to guard his mares. His nostrils flared and his eyes shone with defiance as he screamed his challenge at the intruders. Then he lowered his head almost to the ground, his neck outstretched as he dove at the mares, driving them into a bunch. Tota had his rawhide rope ready. Raven coiled his rope too and began to circle around the milling horses. Whistle again, Raven cried to Kaya. Keep calling your horse. She wants to come to you. Kaya repeated her whistle. Steps High rung around, trying to elude the rogue, but each time she swerved away from him, he drove her back with the other horses. Now Tota, on Runner, circled the herd in the other direction to distract the rogue. The rogue pawed the ground, snorting and trumpeting to drive off the challenger, screaming fiercely that these mares belonged to him alone. When the rogue's back was to her, Kaya rode around behind the herd. Steps High made another dash for her, breaking away from the other horses. Kaya swung her rope and swiftly threw it over Steps High head. She had her horse again. In a burst of speed, Kaya on the chestnut horse rode away from the herd. Leading Steps High, the foal running behind, they galloped off. Raven on his horse quickly caught up to Kaya. Let's race, he called to her with a grin. Is your horse still fast? Tota came galloping after, and they rode up the valley, the rogue's shrill trumpeting echoing behind them. Stones clattered from under the horses' hooves as they ascended the narrow trail that led over the ridge. Heading back to the hunting party, they made their way through broad canyons and deep gulches. As they rode, Tota studied the sky and the puffy, misshapen white clouds that rose on the updrafts. He seemed worried. In a narrow canyon, he said, "Wait here. I want to get a look at the countryside from the crest of that hill." Kaya slipped from the chestnut horse and went to Steps High. Her horse shuddered, then pushed her head affectionately against Kaya's shoulder. Kaya ran her palm down the muzzle, soft as doeskin, and stroked the powerful jaw and sleek neck. She gazed into Steps High's dark, glistening eyes and felt her own fill with tears. "You've chosen to be my horse again," she whispered. "Katsi, yow yow, my beautiful one." The foal nuzzled Steps High's flank. Raven, look at her foal," Kaya cried. She smiled at the foal's short brush of a tail, long legs, and big eyes. "Isn't he handsome with all the black spots? Won't he be?" The sound of running horses interrupted her excited words. Tota reined in runner, hooves plowing the sand, and motioned for Kaya to mount the chestnut horse again. "There's a fire just over the ridge. The wind is spreading it this way. We have to get out of this gulch." He kept his voice low, but she heard the warning in his tone. Kaya glanced at the ridgeline. She saw a plume of smoke, but it was thin and white. It didn't look threatening. 3 or 4 small spot fires burned near the top of the ridge, but the grass there was thin and sparse, and the blazes no larger than cooking fires. What had Tota seen that alarmed him? "Stay with me and keep close," Tota said. He urged Runner ahead on the narrow game trail that ran down the gulch. Kaya jumped back on the chestnut, clasped Steps High's rope tightly, and followed her father, with Raven coming up right behind. When she looked back again, only moments later, more fires burned from sparks blowing into the scrub brush. And now she could hear something hissing and growling in the distance. Like a mountain lion, the fire was leaping after them. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2. In the next video, we will read chapter 3.